Welcome to this episode of the Founders Speak podcast in collaboration with Arjun. Joining me on the yellow table today is Mishal Adamji, who is the co-founder of Trukkr. I think Trukkr is a US-based business, but most of your business is in Pakistan.
That's correct. We're a US company operating in Pakistan currently.
Excellent. So welcome to SFF and welcome to, I guess, the maiden podcast which the Founders Speak is doing. So, Michelle, I just wanted to actually mention the fact that, today's sort of chat is about a 10 to 12 minute chat. We're not going to talk about Trukkr. We're going to talk about you, right?
Sure.
We're going to talk about your journey as a founder. So I start these conversations usually with a very open-ended sort of question, and which allows the conversation to hopefully flow smoothly. So, first question is, tell us a little about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey as a founder. How did it all start for you? And in sort of sharing that answer with us, share with us a couple of sort of instances or events that have taken place in your journey so far, which sort of shaped and molded you into the founder you are today. Yeah,
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me on the podcast.
My
Happy
pleasure.
to be here. So I'm Mishal. I'm a co-founder at Trukkr. We're the largest embedded finance platform in Pakistan for logistics. My journey started off really early on in Karachi. So I was born in the US and I moved to Karachi when I was young in Pakistan. And that's where I met my co-founders very early on. So my co-founders and I would carpool together to elementary school at a US State Department school in Karachi. And we got to know each other and became friends. After high school, I moved on to America. I studied in UNC in Chapel Hill. And my co-founders were at Columbia, where they were roommates and got to know each other much better. After my college undergrad, I moved to Dubai. And I worked in a private equity fund for about 4.5 years. It was a great experience. Got to live in Saudi, got to live in Cairo, got to live in Dubai, see how business happens in the region. Really opened my eyes because, I'd come from an American education and then sort of got that exposure to how business is done in this part of the world, in that part of the world. So that was really, really exciting. In 2010, I did something very counterintuitive. I moved from Dubai back to Pakistan to start a business with a couple of partners, distributing diesel automotive parts for truck drivers across 3 or 4 countries in that part of the world. Long story short, we scaled that business to a 25 million euro a year business, and we sold that business in 2018. At the same time, while I was sort of doing all this, my co-founders Ali and Shariar, they they had finished Columbia and done the Wall Street banking and banking in London, and they also moved back in 2010 and they started a trucking company. And that was really unusual. People were like, hey, wait a second, you have an Ivy League degree and you're on Wall Street, and why are you driving trucks in Pakistan? And they were like, no, we want to build something substantial. Fast forward 10 years, I just sold my company. They had sort of built it to a national level scale, were looking to professionally manage it. And we sat down, we started chatting, and we're like, I've learned a little bit about sort of the pain points of carriers. And carriers are people who move cargo, like truck drivers. And they had gotten a lot of experience as incumbents in the industry, right? So they had run a trucking company across the country. And we decided that there were huge inefficiencies and problems that we could not solve as sort of participants and as stakeholders in that ecosystem. What we had to do was we had to actually create the ecosystem for logistics in Pakistan. One thing we really understood well is we're all finance guys. So one thing we understood really well was trucking alone is about $15 billion industry in Pakistan, and it's largely it's totally unbanked. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to build a financial services platform in Pakistan to sort of service that industry very, very effectively. Our objective was, first of all, if you're going to build a financial services company in Pakistan, you have to collect proprietary data and you have to really understand what the opportunities are. And we had 10 years each of experience in the industry, but we came into the project assuming we knew nothing and that we had to sort of let the data speak to us. So we built. I'm not going to talk too much about Trukkr, but we built Pakistan's first transport management system. All the big companies in the country use it to orchestrate the entire supply chain. Uh, we have 40,000 truck drivers on our platform. So about 15% of all truck drivers in the country are exclusively on our platform, and 120 of the 150 biggest companies in the country are exclusively on our platform. The upshot is that all this data collection from the 40,000 drivers and 120 of the biggest companies, over 2 years, we just collected data, really try to understand the opportunities, what the needs and demands of the stakeholders were. And in 2022, we began deploying trip-based working capital financing for carriers in the industry in Pakistan. Long story short, we've deployed about $25 million of capital over the last 2 years. We have probably some of the best, and we have the best NPLs in the country, and we have very, very strong.
So I'm going to
returns.
drag this conversation back to you now.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks a lot for telling us about Trukkr, and that sort of sets.
Apologies
the scene.
for the Trukkr pitch.
No, that's fine. That's all right. Okay, it's your prerogative. How did you come about making a decision that you wanted to work with these two guys?
I think one of the cool things about startups is that you have the opportunity to work with some of the smartest people you know. And Sharia and Ali and Kasra, the co-founders, were incredibly smart people. And generally in Pakistan, the way it works is there's like a boss type of guy and everyone else is just following orders. And having built a business that way, I didn't want to do it that way again. I wanted to be the dumbest person in the room. And so I just teamed up with some of the smartest people I knew who had that domain expertise and that knowledge and complemented my skills very, very nicely. So it's actually been amazing working with
So let me
people
ask a very simple question. What did they see in you?
I don't know. You got to ask them that question. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm just kidding. No, so I really understood sort of how to build a business from 0 to 10. And you come up with the idea with very little money, with very little capital. How do you build technology? How do you convince people that what you're building is worthwhile? And I think I was pretty decent at that. And because our focus on sort of not a challenge we faced, because the focus was on collecting data early on and not deploying capital, hoping for the best, like a lot of startups, we had a lot of difficulty raising venture capital from Pakistani funds early on.
Okay, so you're four founders?
Four founders.
Four founders. I'm assuming the dynamics sometimes do come under strain.
I think that's one of the advantages of working with people you know really well, is that when you know someone well and you know how they think and there's a lot of mutual respect, what happens is you can disagree, logic wins, and no matter what discussion you've had, you come in the next morning and it's back to work and everyone's smiling because you just know these people so well.
And that's been the case.
Oh, that's been the
ever
case.
since?
Absolutely. And
Right. So let me then put you on the spot here, right? So you've been working with them for how many years now?
4 years.
4 years, right? So what have been tell me about some of the challenges you've had in that journey, right? So you'd be the first founder who'd say I've had none. So be careful when you say you've had no challenges.
No, I've had a ton of challenges. So
Right.
as I mentioned just a minute ago early on, because we had all built businesses in Pakistan before, we sort of understood one key fact is that to build a scalable startup in Pakistan, there's a lot of infrastructure in other countries that doesn't exist in Pakistan. And to really succeed in the long term, you actually have to spend a lot of time building the infrastructure yourself. So one thing we were all aligned on early on was we're going to build the infrastructure, we're going to build that data collection funnel that's proprietary to us. The challenge we faced with that was that at that time, Pakistan was a very hot market for investment and companies were raising a lot of money at high valuations, predicated on GMV and growth and potential. Because we were focused on collecting data first, it wasn't super attractive to local VCs. So we had to bootstrap the business quite a bit ourselves early on. And it actually led to a very great development because we were able to raise a substantial round of $6.5 million in 2023, where no company in Pakistan could really raise a lot of capital. But because we had spent those 4 years building a deep foundation, building deep origination and pure data, we were able to sort of raise money at a time and it wasn't abundant in Pakistan.
So as a second-time founder, right, what is it that you've learned? And again, I'm not interested in the mechanics of how you run the business.
Yeah.
But you as a person, your skills, your behaviors, right, your values. what are the sort of new things which you've encountered in this sort of second part of your founder journey?
I think when you're building a startup and you raise money, I think it's easy to sort of be profligate with your spending. And one thing we learned early on, which was a bit counterintuitive to how a lot of startups in Pakistan were functioning, was you have to be very thrifty with capital, because it's easy to throw money and sort of generate traction or scale, but it's tough to maintain that traction and scale. We thought Pakistan was a market that over the next 10 years could develop very nicely, but if you're building a business that requires 50 million every 6 months to grow, that's not going to happen today. So our focus was on profitability, on building scale, and sort of really building it similar to how we built our previous businesses, which is it's got to be scalable, it's got to be profitable, it's got to have good unit economics. And honestly, a lot of companies weren't really operating in that way.
Okay, so frame the question slightly differently, right? So Mishal version 1.0, Mishal version 2.0. What's different?
You get a lot more humble when you ever start a startup, to be honest, because when
So
you
have you become humbler?
oh, I've absolutely become humbler because you've had success before, in my job, in my previous business, it's easy to get carried away. But when you're building a startup from scratch, very little money. I mean, the way we look at it is you got to make the coffee for the board meeting and you got to run the board meeting, and that really teaches you a lot about how to build in the trenches, and that was a big learning experience for me. Spending a lot of time in truck addas and traveling to remote locations and spending the night in some shady areas of Pakistan. So it really helped us expand our horizon quite a bit, and that's been really really
So,
interesting.
so what's your advice, right? There are other founders, and we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask this. This is the last question, which is, what's your advice to founders in emerging markets like Pakistan who don't have the good fortune of three very good co-founders?
I'm almost reluctant to give advice because I think
Or recommendations?
we're
or-
building ourselves, so like it's easy to share opinions. But yeah, so my recommendations would be, no matter how much money you've raised, be very thrifty with how you spend that money, how you allocate those funds. Be very nimble in terms of identifying very early on what's working, what's not working. And if you're building in Pakistan, in a country like Pakistan, my advice is to take a very long-term point of view. It's not going to be that 3-year flip and someone's going to buy you out for $100 million. You've got to build the infrastructure, build the origination, build the sort of strong fundamentals. And it's a long journey. And so you have to mentally prepare yourself that it's going to be a decade of really hard work. And if you do it right and you do everything right, you have a chance of really building something substantial.
No, that's interesting. That to me is the logic of actually running a normal business,
Yeah.
not just worrying about how much I can sell my business in
Exactly.
about 3 to 4 years. No, Mishal, thanks for coming over. Interesting to hear about embedded finance in Pakistan. It's actually quite enlightening to hear that people are gravitating to it. I think what you're doing is both novel, but I think essential for the economy too.
Absolutely.
Because as they say, the truckers keep the economy moving, right? And if they need a little bit of help financially, so good on you to do that. I wish you and Trukkr the very best in the future.
Thank you so much.
Whenever you're next in Dubai, because I believe your family is there.
Yeah.
Do give me a shot. It would be a pleasure to go and grab a cup of coffee or lunch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.